Okay, we're starting the recording right now. And good day, wherever you are. We hope you're having a great one. I'm Rick Zanotti, and next to me is Kirsten Rourke. Hey, Kirsten, how are you?
Hi, Rick. How are you?
I am doing great. And we have a veteran of our shows. This is his third appearance. Second on eMediaChat, but he's been on eLearnChat as well. We all know and love him as Larry Jordan. Hey, Larry, how are you today?
I'm doing very well, Rick. Yourself?
I'm doing great, and we're glad to have you on again. And today we're going to be talking about, I know, one of your favorite subjects, and you've done a lot of training on it, as well as obviously professional work, but audio, digital audio, all the good stuff, microphones, recording, whatever you want to talk about regarding audio.
Well, if you don't ask me a question, it's going to be a pretty unfocused conversation. Kristen, by the way, good to hear your voice. Glad to be back.
That sounds good. So anyway, let's talk a little bit about audio. And
okay.
I know you mostly work on Macs, or only work on Macs, which is okay. Well, all the Windows people will forgive you for that, but that's actually, it's interesting. I've just gotten into Windows 8, which is an interesting approach. It's similar to a Mac in some respects in terms of it's more graphical, though behind the graphical there is obviously what looks like Windows 7 on the back end, but not a bad experience as far as a working experience. It's different. So I use both. I've got my iMac, I've got a Windows 8 machine, and having fun just playing with the different OSs and just seeing what's going on with that. Have you seen the new iMacs? Speaking of,
I have. In fact, I've ordered one of them, and one of the more popular blogs I've written recently was one where I described whether you could use the iMac for video editing, and then the second blog, which is how I equipped the iMac that I bought. And that not only was covered in my website, but Post Magazine picked it up. And we've had a lot of comments back on people that are looking to configure their system and trying to decide what all the different technical specs mean and where they want to spend their money. So we talked about that for a bit.
That sounds good. Did you get the 27-incher?
Yep, 27-inch.
Yep.
Yeah, because for video editing, both Adobe Premiere and Final Cut 10 are optimized for big screens.
Yes.
And if you are consuming video, then you need to design the video to be consumed on a smaller screen. But when you are creating video, the extra screen real estate makes a difference, and it's worth the price to spend the money. If what you're working on is word processing, for instance, it may or may not make any difference. Or, spreadsheets, we could argue that probably wouldn't make a whole lot of difference. But with interfaces with video, and as we're moving from standard def to high def, and now there's consideration of moving from standard to high def to 2K and 4K images, you need more real estate to be able to look at the pictures and see what the pixels are actually doing on the image. So having a larger screen there makes a lot of sense.
Yep. And I haven't read that one blog on that, but how I've used the iMac for video editing. It seems to do pretty well. I've got a Promise RAID attached to it, so it's pretty fast, and I haven't had any issues with it. The only thing I don't like about the iMac, and I don't know how you feel about this, but it does run hot. I just don't like the fact that I could cook eggs on the back of it and probably have a good breakfast.
Well, you're not going to multitask?
I am, but I'm afraid of leaving it on 24/7. Other people said you can. The Apple Store says you can, but it's one of the only machines I turn off at night.
The iMac?
The iMac.
Not the MacBook?
No, the iMac, the big iMac.
Because I'm sure mine is, I don't know. Mine doesn't get that hot.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Mine gets hot. And my
maybe
office is
yours
cold.
likes you more.
No, my office is cold too, so I'm not sure. It just runs warm. Have you had that experience at all, Larry, or do you let it run 24/7?
And one of the reasons that the system's got a metal back is the whole metal back acts as a heat sink.
That's right.
And as we need faster and faster processes, the processor's cooking along so quickly quickly, that it generates a massive amount of heat, which is one of the reasons why those Core i5 and Core i7 processors haven't made it to laptops, because they'd melt your lap.
Right.
So with the iMac acting as a heat sink, you're going to radiate a lot of heat. So the trade-off is, do you want the speed? If the speed's not important to you, you can step down to a slower processor and the heat decreases. But as the speed of the processor increases, the heat also rises.
Yep. Yeah, that's true. I just noticed that. Well, I guess it's because they haven't really done the new Mac Pros with the extra edition of the Thunderbolt or anything like that. So we're kind of a prosumer machine. It's more of a consumer machine that a lot of pros are using because they don't really have a lot of other choices right now. It'll be interesting to see if Apple goes, like they said, next year and comes out with a new Mac Pro. That will be interesting.
Well, I wonder about the use of the word prosumer, because if you look at the iMac now, it's faster than the Mac Pro was 3 years ago.
That's true.
So and here's another question I've got. How many cards do you have plugged into your Mac Pro?
Cards?
Because the only reason for buying a Mac Pro is to have either larger memory space, and the current iMac can take you up to 32 gig, or to have cards that plug into the back. You've got a Thunderbolt drive, which is a direct PCIe connection. So you've got, although it's only 4 lanes, not 16, no hard disk talks at 16 lanes anyway. So what's the advantage to you of a Mac Pro if you don't have plug-in cards and you're not using more than 32 gig of memory?
Actually, for me, no advantage. I don't have a Mac Pro, nor do I see any advantage other than
portability,
heat management. Not Mac Pro. No, the Mac Pro.
The Mac Pro, not the MacBook
Tower
Pro.
one.
Sorry.
Yeah. Heat dissipation. They do have better fans, better heat dissipation, but that's about it. Other than that, because the screen's not, only because the screen is what generates probably, I'd say almost 70% of the heat. I have left my iMac on for a couple of nights, a couple of times, and I make sure that the screensaver is on and turns the screen off, and it doesn't run as hot as soon as the screen goes off. So that's the only thing I've really noticed that I don't care for, that it does run a little bit hotter than. And the heat just worries me, because components, when they get too hot or over hot, I haven't had that issue yet. Just one of those paranoid things of, is it going to get hot? Is it going to burn? I have had fans go on.
The heat is not coming from the screen. The heat's coming from the processor.
You think? Because I noticed if I turn the screen off, it's a lot less hot on that. Of course, the processor's not doing much when it's off either.
That's right.
So that's probably part of it.
So I got a question for you, Larry.
I am sitting down and eagerly anticipating. What you got?
Awesome. What is your, basically, the first place that people who are jumping into handling audio on their own, where's the first place they should look? What's the first thing they should start taking care of, and first stuff they should buy for themselves and learn?
Well, I would advise against buying anything until you go through a little philosophical exercise. And the philosophical exercise is this: what's the purpose of audio? And I want to just spend a couple minutes talking about that before we start talking about gear, because it's easy to get distracted by gear and lose sight of the bigger question, which is, why are we using audio in the first place? I was thinking about this morning. I'm mulling over writing a blog designed for the general audience as opposed to the professional video editing audience. And I realized that what audio is, unlike video, audio is a direct pipeline to the emotions. Video shows you what's going on. Video shows you, quote, what's real. Video talks to your intellect. Audio talks to your emotions. If you look at the acting, compare the acting of the silent films and compare the acting of today, where we've got music and sound effects to reinforce exactly what the actor's supposed to be feeling. Notice how much more subtle our actors are. A lift of an eyebrow or a twitch of the corner of the mouth conveys a ton of emotion. Why? Because it's reflected in the audio that goes with it. If you look at the way that we deal with music today versus the way we deal with music, say, in the 1960s, films in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s were very skimpy on music. They would do a few music cues. But now films are wall-to-wall music. And I think the reason is producers have realized, whether for good or bad, that music tells our audience what they should feel, the way that pictures tell us what we should think. And
Oh, I like
the
that.
the whole field of sound design, which Walter Murch invented with Apocalypse Now, of creating a sonic environment within which our actors live, means that we have to have a lot less information conveyed through dialogue, because we can convey the bleakness of a desert with the howling wind, or the tight confines of a city with the babble of human voices. That audio reinforces the emotional aspect, the environmental aspect of what we're doing. So that being said, first thing you need to ask yourself is, what am I doing with my audio? Am I designing music? Am I doing sound design? Am I am I editing audio that goes with my video projects? What am I doing? Because those affect the tools that you buy. That being said, now we can start to look at all the different elements within audio that are driving that emotional force of our projects. And from that, we can decide the tools that we need to buy. Always think about what you want to do with something first. Once you've got that goal in mind, then it's easy to find the gear to go with it.
Now, it's interesting. If you've ever done this experiment, and I recommend everybody do this, if you like video games and you have a PlayStation or you just play on a PC, turn off the sound. No matter how cool those graphics are, the animations, the video, without the sound, it becomes worthless. It has no impact at all. None. It's a really interesting experiment. I've made a lot of people do that, and they go, oh, that was kind of a crummy game. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and you lose a major aspect of it. Even a first-person shooter, you can shoot someone, but you know what? Without the sound, it just doesn't really have any feeling, any impact, or any... I don't think you relate to it at all.
Yeah, I'm absolutely dying for The Hobbit to come out, and I know that the last Lord of the Rings series, the music actually, there were points in which just the music told me to cry, and I cried. It worked beautifully.
I think one of the things I teach my students when they're learning video production is to watch a show, specifically a soap opera, because those are some of the best that are out there, but to watch a soap opera with the sound turned off. And when you turn the sound off, you're no longer getting hooked into the story. You're not being tripped up by the dialogue. And now you're able to say, look at where that camera is placed. Look at how the camera is moving. Look at how the cameras are positioned, or where the lighting is coming from, or how the actors are blocked. It's a really useful analytical tool, because by turning the sound off, you're able to tune out the story. And now you're no longer a viewer, you can be an analyst. And I've been doing this, I don't know, for decades, and I find it really, really useful for the purposes of figuring out how a particular thing was done. It's a lot easier to analyze because the story's not getting in the way.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Larry, what do you think one of the most important things to keep in mind with audio is? In other words, I mean, it's kind of a broad, open-ended question, but if you had one important thing to do, to keep in mind regarding audio and the use of audio, what do you think that would be?
So there's two answers to that. One's technical, one's emotional. The technical answer is, at no time, for any reason at all, period, should your audio peaks ever exceed 0 dB. The audiometers don't measure the volume of your headsets. The audiometers measure the volume of the sound that the listeners are listening to. And for a whole raft of technical reasons, your audio levels should never exceed 0 dB, not for peaks. Because as soon as it does, it distorts, and distortion sounds like fingernails scraping across a blackboard, or popping or clicking. It causes all kinds of problems throughout the broadcast cable or DVD chain. It's just really bad form. A lot of people that don't understand what audiometers do either don't pay attention to them, or figure that they're showing headset volume, and they don't really adjust them with any sense, or rhyme, or reason. They just let them go out of whack. And one of the things I've learned is that people will watch postage stamp grainy video as long as it's got good audio, and they'll walk out of an IMAX theater where the audio's distorted. Blair Witch is a classic example. Low-grade video, high-grade audio made a fortune. And I was recently in an IMAX, which is a beautiful picture, but they had the audio cranked so high it was distorting. Everybody got up and walked out after 20, 30 seconds.
People actually walking out.
You just can't live with bad audio. You can live with bad picture because your imagination fills in the details. So from a technical point of view, the absolute number one rule is audio levels must never, not once, not ever, not even for a short period of time, exceed 0 dB. The aesthetic thing is a bit more subtle. Audio is always in support of the picture. You never want the person sitting next to you to say, whoa. great sound effect. You want the person sitting next to you to say, wow, that is a great picture, not realizing that the reason the picture is great is because the quality of the sound effects are there. So you've spent all this time tramping through the wilds of the wilderness trying to get that one frog sound with no jet noise overhead, no traffic noise, no car horns, no nothing. The frog sounds beautiful. You don't want to bring that frog up so loud that people say, whoa, loud frog. Instead, you want them to say, that is an incredible scene. So even though you spend all this time, money, and effort making your sound effects sound as good as possible, you never want to have them draw attention to themselves. It's always in support of the video. And when you do use your sound effects in support of the video, you'll be stunned at how much better your video looks without you having to spend a dime on the picture.
So Larry, in the chat room, Jeff said that he was going to put his audio over the limit, but your voice showed up in the back of his head and he stopped.
Tell Jeff he's a very wise person.
He is a very wise person, actually. So there's all the different ways in which you should approach sound and the types of technology based on what you want to do with it. What if your goal is to be dealing with video editing and audio editing for low-level commercial stuff? A little better than home movies, but certainly not professional level.
Well, I think you still use professional tools even if you're not going to demand professional results. I'm a huge fan of Adobe Audition. The CS6 release is available both on Windows and on Mac. It's been around for a long period of time. It just recently, with the CS6 release, showed up on the Mac. But in Windows, it's a staple of radio broadcasting. It's been around for a long period of time. In fact, it began as an application called Cool Edit many years ago, very similar to the lineage of other applications that have had a long gestation period. The reason that you want to use a high-quality audio tool is that way you already have the tools at hand and you're developing the knowledge, so as something higher quality comes in, you're able to use it without having to throw everything that you've got out and start afresh with tools that you don't know. Adobe Audition gives us several things. I mean, you could look at Avid Pro Tools. That's another really high-quality package, and there are others on the Windows, for instance. We've got Sony Creative Software SoundForge or SoundForge Pro.
Actually,
it's not as though there's just one or two tools, but I'm a big fan of Audition because of the way that it integrates with all the major video editing packages. It works with Final Cut 7 and Final Cut 10 and Adobe Premiere 5.5 and CS6 and Avid Media Composer 5. Audition gives me the control that I need to be able to fix things like remove hum or take out background noise. It allows me to select a singer's pitch and adjust the pitch if they're a little bit flat or a little bit sharp. It allows me to have an infinite number of clips and mix them all together so the audience hears what they want to hear and doesn't hear what they don't want to hear. The tool gives me the expandability and the capability to do virtually whatever I want, with one exception. There's an entire different brand of audio, which is the process of creating music, which is wrapped around MIDI and synthesizers and sampling. And this is a playground in which I don't play. Here, tools like Mark of the Unicorn and Reason, Apple's Logic, these are tools that are designed to have musicians sit at keyboards and craft beautiful music or work with sampled instruments. What we do with programs like Pro Tools and Audition, and in the past with Soundtrack Pro, is we take microphones, which have been recorded, either recording performances or recording interviews or all the stuff that video does. We take audio which has been recorded from a microphone and mix it together. The music creation tools tend to want to work with audio which is created on a keyboard, and the keyboard is then transformed into music before our eyes. So I don't know anything about music except I enjoy listening to it. What I pay attention to is mixing of microphones, whether it's for a musical recording or whether it's for a video project. But my principal focus on audio is mic mixing, and there I think Audition's a wonderful tool.
And what would the tools you recommend to go along with that?
Well, I've checked. Don't tell Rick, okay? But I've checked every computer that's ever shipped since about the mid-19Xs, and not one computer has eardrums on it. Now, I know this comes as a shock to you, but how are we supposed to get the audio into our computer if there's no eardrums? I mean, what audio is pressure waves floating through the air that causes our eardrum to vibrate, that triggers a set of neurons inside our brain, that causes electrical signals that causes us to hear. And there's no neurons, there's no eardrums, we have a problem. And worse, audio is analog. It's a wave floating through the air. How do we convert an analog wave into something a computer can deal with? It's a process called digitization. And we take a typical microphone. That microphone then creates an analog signal. And what we do is we sample that signal in really, really small time slices, and we measure the average voltage for that time signal, and we store the average voltage for what's called a sample. We create about 48,000 of those samples a second, and through the application of a very cool theorem called the Nyquist theorem, we take the sample rate of our audio, 48,000 samples per second, divide it by 2. That equals the maximum frequency response that our audio sample is able to reproduce, which in this case, a 48,000 sample, case sample, 48,000 samples per second yields a frequency response of 24,000 cycles per second. Now, as I know you know, human hearing goes from 20 cycles per second at the deep bass to 20,000 cycles per second at the high frequency. So a sample rate of 48K gives us every frequency that we would want to hear, assuming you have normal human hearing, which is the hearing that's attributed to an 18-year-old. As we get older, our hearing changes, but basically, for all of our lives, we'll say that our hearing goes from 20 cycles, extremely deep bass, to 20,000 cycles, extremely high end. It's kind of cool. The lowest note on a piano, when you reach all the way to the left and you hit the piano key, is 27.5 cycles per second, 27.5. And the highest note on the piano, all the way to the right, is 4,186 cycles, 4186. So the frequency range on the piano is almost 4,200 cycles, and yet our hearing goes 5 times greater than that, to 20,000. So one of the things that we need to do, and this sort of physics lesson continues, is we got to figure out some way to take the analog signal, the voltage, varying voltage coming off the microphone, and convert that into something digital that the computer can use. Now, if you don't have a lot of money and you don't care about quality, you buy a cheap microphone, you plug it into the back of your computer through that little computer jack on Windows or Mac, and everything's fine, except this is called a high impedance connection. A high impedance connection is really susceptible to hum, susceptible to noise, doesn't generally yield very good quality. It's cheap, but it also sounds cheap. A better way is not to plug your microphone directly into the computer at all. Instead, you want to plug your microphone into what's called an audio interface. This is a small box about the size of a paperback book that allows you to plug 1 or 2 microphones, sometimes more, into this box, and it's automatically digitized, converted into a signal that comes into your computer, generally USB 2, but sometimes FireWire, depending upon how many channels you want to bring in. Companies that work with these are companies like Roland, with their Edirol brand, and Alesis or Personas. These are all high-grade companies that provide digital converters that convert from the analog world that the microphone picks up to the world the computer works with, the digital world. In my particular case, I've got something really high-end. I've got a microphone preamp, which is made by a company called Aphex, A-P-H-E-X. It's the master voice processor. What this does is it takes my microphone, runs it through a preamp, smooths it out to make sure that I don't have any spikes, so I have a nice clean signal going out. Then it feeds it via fiber optic cable into the Toslink connector on the back of my computer. So all of my audio is coming in digitally and fiber optically, which means it's completely impervious to AC hum or any other noise that's in the environment. Comes in a pure digital signal. The computer then processes it and records it beautifully because it's such a clean, pure signal. By the way, I'm working with an AKG 520C headset microphone, which I like a great deal because it has a nice warm response and it's got nice crisp highs. The reason we care about this, as long as we're talking about physics, and this is something I just love talking about, a couple of other things you might want to think about. Low frequency sounds, which is the vowels, A, E, I, O, and U. Low-frequency sounds give your voice its richness, its warmth. This is why radio announcers like dragging up the bass to make their voice really deep and sexy. The problem is you can't understand a voice that's all bass. Consonants, T, P, K, these are all high-frequency sounds, and it's the consonants that provide diction. In fact, the difference between the letter F as in Frank and S as in Sam, both of which are fricatives formed by air flowing across the tip of your tongue against the roof of your mouth, the difference between the letter F as in Frank and S as in Sam is 6,100 cycles for a guy and 8,000 cycles per second for a girl. So in order for me to be able to distinguish between the letter F, go to F Street, or go to S Street, that sibilance is 6,100 cycles for a guy. That sound is 8,000 cycles for a girl. And if you can't hear that level of high frequency, it's impossible for you to tell the difference between the letter F as in Frank or S as in Sam, because you can't hear that high frequency sibilance. So when we're working with external gear, these audio interfaces, as they're called, which cost about $100, what they're doing is they are taking really, really high quality microphones and converting it into a digital signal, which can then be recorded by any audio software inside your computer, whether it's Windows or Mac. And there's nothing that says Windows or Mac with these audio interfaces. What you want is something that's got a really good preamp that takes the very, very low voltages coming from your microphone and amplifies them without adding noise to the signal and without distorting it. Converts it to a USB signal if it's a stereo pair, or a FireWire if it's like 8 to 10 channels that I'm recording at the same time. Feeds that into your computer and you're good to go. So there's high quality microphones. We're looking at brands like AKG and Audio-Technica, Sennheiser. We're looking at audio interfaces from brands like Alesis and Roland and Prosumer. We're looking at high quality cables. Now, you don't need to spend $1 bajillion for cables. You walk into an audio store and suddenly they're selling gold plated thises and that's for $800 gajillion. A reasonably good quality cable does not have to be gold plated, doesn't have to be $750,000 that passes no. As long as it's made by a reputable company, it's got a name that's been around for more than a week and a half, it's got an XLR connector. The reason we use those big, fat, heavy XLR connectors is they are noise canceling. They get rid of hum. By the way, the cable itself is constructed in a way that really tiny 1/8 inch mini plugs don't get rid of hum. So then we take our microphone, plug that into a cable, which goes to the preamp, which comes out via USB, comes into the computer, gets recorded on our software. And now the last big question we've got is, what do we use for monitoring? And notice I said monitoring, not speakers. A monitor is designed to have a flat line, smooth reproduction of your audio, so you hear exactly what it sounds like when it was recorded. Speakers are designed for the consuming of audio. Here, you'll bring in subwoofers and you'll bring in these giant things that are vibrating, causing the entire house to vibrate. You don't want speakers when you're mixing. You want monitors. What you want the audio to sound like is exactly what it's recorded. Does it have a thin bass? In which case you want to bring it up. If you're feeding it to a subwoofer, that's going to automatically boost the bass, whether the bass is there or not. And you start to dial out some of the bass because it's too heavy, and then somebody that doesn't have a subwoofer listens to it and sounds thin and tin, flat, and very unpleasant. So you get monitor speakers from companies like JBL or M Audio, or Yamaha's got some good speakers. Mackey's a little bit too expensive, but makes a good brand. Genesis is the standard in Hollywood. You can't throw a rock without hitting Genesis speakers, but they're extremely expensive. But you want to make sure that inside the speaker, if it's a monitor, they'll plot a chart, a graph, that shows the frequency reproduction of the speaker. And you want to make sure that that line is as flat as possible, and it doesn't fall off above 80 cycles, and it doesn't fall off below 15,000 cycles. So you want to have it be as flat as possible from about 80 cycles to 15,000. And the flatter the line, the better the speaker, because then you're going to actually hear the sound that you recorded, and that's what you want to be able to mix to when you load the sound into your software. Your turn.
Wow, I might start clapping now. That was brilliant. That was really good.
Now, I'm actually concerned because you said computers don't have eardrums.
I'm sorry to break the news to you, Rick. I know that it comes as a shock.
That was a tough one. But
well, maybe Rick's computers do have
computers
eardrums.
are like wives, kind of. Well, we won't go there. But.
Oh, Leslie's going to smack you for that. Wow. Okay, so let's see. Let me go into the chat room and see if we have questions here. All right, I'm going to toss this to you, Rick, while I'm playing around in the chat room here.
Sure. Well, Larry, you mentioned one thing about 48,000 as encompassing pretty much the full range of our hearing. Mm-hmm. A lot is still recorded in 44,100. Mm-hmm. And I noticed that, especially on PCs, 48,000 doesn't always work as well, partly because of the bad sound cards and everything else. Any reason why people would record 44-100 over 48,000?
You know where 44-100 came from? Thank you. I'm glad you asked.
Yes.
So here's the
Where did
history
it
of
come from,
44-1.
Larry?
Here's the history of 44.1. The CD spec was being thrashed out in the 1960s. CDs are actually that old. Now, if you remember back in those days, and Rick, I know this predates you, but we'll describe it. Music in the 1960s was played on what were called records. Now, a record was a piece of vinyl, is 7 inches in diameter, or 12 inches in diameter, 45 or 33, that had a single groove cut into it. This is one of my favorite third grade jokes. It's how many grooves are there in the record? The answer is 1. It's a spiral that goes from the outside of the record going in, as opposed to CDs and DVDs, which are also a spiral, but they start at the inside and go out. But I digress. In those days, the driving dominant force in the musical industry in the 1960s was not popular music. It was classical music. The money was in classical. So as they were developing the spec, they asked all the leading classical record labels what they would need to do to be able to shift them from vinyl records to CDs. And the answer is that the CD needed to be able to play audio equal to the length of a double-sided LP. In other words, it needed to have an hour of music because the single side of a record would have a half hour, depending upon how it was mastered. So we needed to have a CD which could hold an hour of music. A stereo signal is 2 audio tracks, the left channel and the right channel. So they needed to figure out what size file a stereo pair would create. It needed to have a frequency response equal to or greater than a record. It needed to have a frequency response ideally equal to or greater than human hearing, and it needed to fit to a CD. In those days, CDs could only hold 600 megabytes of data. So the equation became really easy. What bit rate do we need to have to generate a 600 megabyte stereo file that would run for an hour? And the answer is 44,100 samples per second yields a stereo file of 600 megabytes. So as long as you sampled at 44.1, it gave you a full range above human hearing. The full range of human hearing, and it would fit to a CD. Now, in the 70s and late 80s, we figured out how to get 700 megabytes onto a CD, which we couldn't do in the 60s. But when the spec was developed, the reason that 44.1 was chosen is it enabled us to create a stereo pair encompassing the full range of human hearing that would fit onto a 600 megabyte CD. The mathematics of compression, however, lead us to 48,000 because we can compress 48K better than 44.1 for a variety of mathematical reasons, specifically because 48 is a magical number. It's divisible by 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 6 and 8 and so there's because of, and the number 8 is a critical one because that's the way that binary data is stored. It's stored in groups of powers of 2. So we have a better compression response. We have better mathematical processing of 48K files than 44.1. Now, if you have a cheap sound card, and I'm not going to mention Windows in general, but Windows are known for having sound cards which are sub-grade, which is one of the reasons I like doing all of my media work on a Macintosh because I end up with much higher quality. The sound card itself can affect that sample rate, but 44.1 was invented to solve a problem with CDs in the 1960s, and 48,000 is used for video, and both 44.1 and 48 will yield results which exceed human hearing. So if you have audio which is properly recorded at good levels at 44.1 and properly recorded with good levels at 48, the normal human being cannot hear any difference between the two of them.
Wow.
And to this day, we still have a lot of 44-100, amazingly enough. Now, the Mac defaults to 48, I believe, right?
Yeah, it defaults to whatever you want.
Okay.
All CDs today are 44.1. There is no CD that's 48. All video today defaults to 48. Mm-hmm. So if you're doing both, you need a system that can equally handle 44.1 and 48.
Yeah.
Question from the chat room.
Hello, chat room.
How is Larry going to connect his Aphex into the new iMac? Would you put it into an XLR to USB? New iMac does not have mic input.
Well,
I'm very distressed about that.
Yes.
It doesn't, well, there's 3 steps. One, the new iMac, as far as I know, doesn't have Toslink, so I can't get direct fiber channel in, which really depresses me. So number one, I'm not going to be using that Macintosh for recording because I'm ordering it specifically for editing, so the recording gets done on a different system. In fact, the system I'm using now will continue to be the recording system, and the new one will go into the edit suite, and I'll be using it for editing. So the honest answer is I didn't worry about that because I knew I wouldn't be recording on that new Mac. But that sort of sidesteps the question. For the future, because Toslink is gone in the new Macs, which I think is a sadness, but Apple doesn't listen to me. So Toslink is gone, and we don't have a microphone input. One, the no microphone input is fine with me because you shouldn't be using it in the first place. So what I'll do is I'll use, I happen to be a big fan of Edirol, that's E-D-I-R-O-L. Their UA25A audio interface gives me two microphones that I can feed in or a stereo pair coming out. So it's made by Roland. It's called the Edirol UA25A, and I use that for the preamp. My microphone goes into that, comes out USB goes into the computer, and the computer takes the audio signal. So if I needed to record on the new Mac, I would use an Edirol box. For the Digital Production Buzz that I have, which is my live broadcast, there I have a playout server which has all of my commercials and all of my theme music on it. The playout server goes to a Presonus. The Presonus comes into a Mackie audio console. I have the Mackie do the mix. I have two phone lines coming in with Telos One phone line interfaces. I've got the audio coming in from the playout server. I've got a Skype line coming in from a computer, and I've got audio coming in from another computer. Then I've got the two live microphones from Mike Horton, who's my co-host, and myself. So it's an 8-channel audio mix that then gets fed out to a DBX compressor, and that DBX compressor feeds a Toslink to an iMac, which is about 8 years old, because I don't need a lot of bandwidth to be able to stream audio. I feed that out, it does all the compression, and I do the live show coming off that old iMac. But I've got an all-digital signal path. From the moment it comes off the Mackie mixing console, it's all digital and fiber optic until it hits the air. So it really depends upon what your particular needs are. If all you want to do is to record a microphone, the Edirol is perfect. If you need to start to do more than that, then we need to look at the signal path and figure out how to deal with multiple mics at the same time, whether you're doing it for recording single channel or you're taking multiple channels and doing it live. I also have an Alesis mixer, which gives me 6 audio channels. I use this for my live broadcasts where I've got multiple people on stage at the same time. And here I will do a live web stream of a mono signal because I can stream mono easily, but do a 6-channel audio record to a MacBook Pro. So I feed each individual's microphone into its own channel within Audition, so I can go back later and pull out each speaker and edit it and put an edited program together. And because I've got individual channels recorded on the MacBook Pro, it makes it easy for me to take out a cough or a stumble from one speaker without affecting sync or without affecting all the other speakers at the same time. So there's lots of different ways. The Alesis, it's an Alesis Firebox that I've got coming in for the multi-channel recording, the Edirol for recording, the Presonus for live. There's lots of different choices.
Can't have enough gear. You just can't have enough gear. Yeah, I've got the Mackie Onyx 1220i. I like the Mackie. It's been good. I've looked at the Alesis. You like that one?
Mm-hmm. The Alesis mixer is really nice. It works. I mean, what I need is something. I need portability. I need small. I need reliable. It's been with me for 3 years. It works great.
That's good. Yeah, and that I was looking to get a portable mixer because you can't carry this Mackie. It's just big and heavy and probably weighs about 25 pounds by itself.
Yeah, but it's indestructible.
It
is. It'll last until your grandkids retire.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah, I like it. It's been a good mixer. I bought a Tascam once, and I was actually surprised at how crummy it was. But and not to mention very cheap plastic. It went back. It was promptly replaced by the. Actually, that's when I was looking for something like the Mackie, and I got the Mackie over all of them, and it's been good because it doesn't move. It's in one spot. But so Alesis for a good portable is a way to go.
Mm-hmm. It's one way to go. Yep.
Well, one way to go. Yeah, there's other portables. Which Presonus are you using? I've got the Fire Studio Project at work, and it's a beauty. Runs well, clean.
Yeah, I'd have to look at the box itself. The reason I got the Presonus is because I was doing some experimentation with surround sound. I needed to have a box that had 10 channels of audio out. And the Presonus, actually I needed 6. The Presonus had 10. Mm-hmm. So it has a FireWire connection with 10 channels out. I just happen to be using 2 because I just need a stereo pair out. But I'd have to look and see which version I've got. It's just the audio interface. I don't think it's the Presonus Studio.
Okay. Yeah, they're really nice boxes. In fact, I just got for a Windows machine, the audio box from Personas. Again, it's like the Edirol, very clean. The audio just doesn't. I've had M Audio and I've had issues. Just don't like them as a brand that much. Though I do like the M Audio monitors. They're not bad for the price.
I like the 8s. I'm increasingly dissatisfied with the 5s. I own one of each. I would prefer the BX8 than the BX5. The BX5 has a little bit of a more muddy sound that I'm going to get something other than M Audio in a smaller size monitor when I go back and buy in a couple weeks when I get some monitor speakers for the new Mac.
Interesting. Yeah. You know, it's interesting. They're not the best monitors because they're built for other things, but I have a Bose D20, I think it is. They're about $250. I use them as just really PC monitors, but they actually do a pretty clean job for voice. If I'm listening to voice for voiceover recording, it's clean.
Well, remember, be careful, because what those are doing, and I don't know the brands. I mean, I know Bose, but I don't know the model. So you got to be careful here. But when you take a speaker that knocks the bass out, so that the bass is being thrown over to the subwoofer, and these speakers are just designed for reproducing frequencies from, say, 1,000 to 20,000, it will always sound better for voice, because what makes a voice sound muddy is the bass. And if the speakers don't reproduce the bass, then you're automatically taking the mud away because the bass doesn't exist. The problem is nobody else has those speakers.
That's true.
So you're going to do a mix to speakers which are not giving you the full frequency response. So now you say, whoa, that needs a little bit more bass. Well, you're adding more bass on top of bass because your speakers don't reproduce it, and suddenly it gets really, really muddy and mumbly and ugly because you're not hearing the full frequency response from your speakers, and yet you're assuming that because you can hear it, what you hear is accurate, and that is not the case. That's why you want to be really, really careful when you're doing audio. If you are mixing audio that you want other people to listen to, then you need to make sure that you're hearing it accurately. And if you're mixing it just for yourself and nobody cares, I don't care what you use. You can use tin cups and string. It doesn't make any difference because it's just for you. But when you're doing it for other people, and they need to be able to hear it, and they need to be able to hear it on a wide variety of different speakers, you have to mix it on speakers that are giving you the accurate sound.
Yep.
And those are monitors.
Now, what do you recommend for, I get this question a lot, for good headsets? Or good headphones? Good headphones to monitor after the fact. I think I'm using Sennheisers.
I like AKGs and Sennheisers. Hang on a second. I've got, these are AKGs. The AKG K240 is probably an industry standard, AKG K240. Sennheiser makes some really nice ones as well. But those are two really good brands.
Yeah, I think
don't use earbuds. Actually, the problem is you shouldn't mix with headsets at all. And the reason is headsets are too accurate. They give you too clean a stereo field. Speakers are a bit more real world. And the problem with doing headsets is you hear stuff so precisely that you're cleaning up stuff that nobody would hear on a speaker because it'll never make it out to speaker cones. So you want to be careful here that if you are listening and doing rough cuts, a headset's perfectly fine. But if you're doing the final mix, you want to do the final mix off speakers. And you generally, unless you know that mix is going to be played on a subwoofer, you want to mix on two monitor speakers and not get a subwoofer involved so that you can hear exactly what the sound sounds like. And so if I don't want to disturb my neighbors, I'll be on headsets. But if I need to hear what it really sounds like, I'll be on speakers.
That sounds good.
Okay.
Any more questions from the chat room at this point?
Yep,
close.
I'm actually waiting because there was a question of, what questions are welcome, and I said essentially, jump in. So let me see if anything pops up. Okay, first, Final Cut Pro 1006 audio related question. Is there a way to route your audio through a sound card for monitoring?
Yeah, absolutely. The Macintosh, this is not a Final Cut 10 question, it's a Macintosh question. The Macintosh, when you go up to System Preferences and go to Audio, you can select any system audio device for routing. So what I do is I've got this Edirol thing that I was talking about before. I use that for both going in and coming out. I select the Edirol inside system preferences, and all of my audio routes out of the Macintosh goes to the Edirol and feeds my two speakers. The Macintosh has supported external sound devices for decades. Long time. So this is sound is not a Final Cut issue. Sound monitoring is a systems preferences issue. So as long as you can see your sound device, your audio interface inside the system preferences, then it will be supported by every application, not just Final Cut 10.
Yeah. By the way, earlier you mentioned Sony SoundForge. They now have a Mac version which looks pretty darn good. I haven't gotten it yet. I have used SoundForge for audio, at least for voiceover editing, on Windows, but the Mac version looks quite unique. They've done some interesting things, very fresh interface and a lot of just interesting features that they've added. So it's a jump for Sony. It'll be interesting to see how they do.
It's interesting you mentioned that because yesterday I wrote a review of SoundForge Pro for the Mac, and it's on my website.
What'd you
so
think?
I had a chance to work with it over this last couple days. The big thing about SoundForge for the Mac, it's very similar to some of the programs from BIOS, where you've got SoundForge allows you to edit a single multi-channel audio clip, and it does not allow you to edit audio that's attached to video, but it does allow you to edit a single clip. I think that for people that are doing audio podcasts, for musicians that need to be able to tweak a single clip, for anybody that needs sort of an audio toolkit where you're able to get into the waveform and edit out a specific pop or a click, SoundForge is a really wonderful tool. Where it has a problem is that it does not support QuickTime movies where the audio is attached to the video. So I can't open an audio clip and repair pops and clicks before I bring it into my system for mixing. And the audio repair functionality is okay. It uses the isotope plugins. There's a declicker and a depopper and a denoiser. Declicker, dehummer, and denoiser, which removes background sounds, removes hum, and removes clicks and pops. Because of what I was using, Sony sent me a link to download the file, and they sent me some serial numbers that I could use. They sent them twice, actually, and I lost them both. So I was testing off the trial version, and I discovered that the trial version gives you access to the full range of the software for 15 days, but the isotope stuff doesn't work in trial mode. As soon as you apply the isotope filter, it automatically outputs silence, so there's no way for you to tell whether those filters work or not. Okay. So the three repair functions that I'd be most interested in testing is not actually made by Sony Creative Software. It's licensed from Isotope, and in the trial version you can't tell to see if it works or not. The good news is that they've got a downloadable version, which is a special price of $202.46, and a boxed version, which is about just a shade less than $250. But if you are a video person, the limitations outweigh the advantages. If you're going to be working with video, you're much better off stepping up about $100 and getting Audition, which allows you to work with audio and video clips. And in Audition, not only do you have the waveform editor, which is what makes SoundForge Pro so powerful, but you also have the ability to do multi-track audio mixes. And it's the multi-track mixing which allows us to put projects together. So it'd be like, that's the word, it's like BIOS Inc.'s Peak, which allows you to edit a single clip, would compare with SoundForge Mac Pro. They each allow you to work with a single audio clip. Right. As you start to need to do mixes, you need to do more than just a single audio clip. And here, SoundForge doesn't work. You'd need to step up to Audition. Right. So if you're doing audio repair, audio editing, you're doing audio only, you're a musician, want to take some samples and clean them up, SoundForge is great. Yeah. The other thing I've heard, and I don't know Windows, so I can't say whether this is true, so I put a big asterisk here. But the feedback that I got on my posting is that the feature set of the Windows version and the feature set of the Mac version don't match. So one of the things that you might want to do is you're looking at SoundForge, especially if you've been working with the Windows version and need to move over to the Mac version, is check the feature set. The interface, clean, easy to use, really nice. I like the ability to compare two different clips at the same time, side by side. The ability to see on a single button what the peak levels are, what the RMS levels are, what the average levels are. The one thing it doesn't have is LUFS, which is used in Europe for broadcast. But it's a clean, simple, easy to understand. If you've ever seen a waveform, you'll like the program. Very, very nice and definitely worth looking at. And absolutely, I suggest people download the trial to see if it works in their particular audio environment.
Yeah, now what we found on Windows is that the SoundForge, we record usually with Audition, but we edit many times after we do all the cleanup and processing. We edit it with SoundForge only because we find that the markers in SoundForge make it very quick to edit. They seem faster than what we get with Audition. Now, it could be that we just haven't really spent a lot of time looking at markers in Audition, but because you can convert markers to individual clips later when we do the individual cuts, it's instant. So we can usually edit an hour of audio in about an hour and 15 minutes. So it's fairly quick with SoundForge.
Cool.
Takes a little longer for us in Audition, so we don't do that. But as far as recording and processing, Audition just hands down. We think it's just cleaner, better. What do you think about, and I'll get back to you in a second, Kirsten, I know you've got some questions.
Yep.
A lot of people have asked me, and I don't have any of these, and that's the Waves plugins. A lot of people say Waves makes some of the best plugins in the industry. Do you see any reason to get those? I mean, especially if you're doing voiceover kind of work. Versus maybe in music, I could see where they have some more capabilities, but any reason to get the Waves compressors or things like that?
I bought Waves years and years and years ago, back in the dawn of time before electricity was invented, and I think they make some incredibly good plugins. But your question's impossible to answer. A better way to ask it is, if you've got a video editor, does it make sense to buy any video effects? Well, it depends upon what you're doing. If you're a newscast, all you want to do is get the story on the air. You're not going to spend a lot of time with special effects. If you're doing commercials, you can't have enough effects because everything in a commercial is about getting a look, having a look which will stop the consumer from turning off the sound or turning the channel when a commercial comes on. So it depends upon what your needs are. But Waves are legendary in the industry for the breadth and quality of their plugins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they're not cheap. They're pretty expensive. But
well, you get what you pay for in a lot of cases.
Yeah, that's true. Well, you and I both have.
Look at who was complaining about the cheap sound cards in their PC.
Oh, I know. No,
if you're going to do any serious editing on your PC, you got to swap out the sound card.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah, we don't record anything on PCs directly. It all goes through Aphex into. Actually, we're using as our sound, believe it or not, and. It works. We're using a Mac Mini server as our sound recording machine, as our DAW. Works beautifully. It's fairly quiet. We go through the Presonus into that. And it just works fine. What we do, Aphex actually the Aphex is going through the Presonus for no other reason that it just goes through it. There's no amplifying of the Presonus. And works pretty well. The Presonus has the FireWire, which is why we did that.
I'm a huge fan of the Mac Mini. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them here. 3 of them are used as servers, and 3 of them are used as standalone workstations. I think the only limitation of the Mac Mini is the graphics card. And if you're doing audio, you don't need a graphics card. So I think you made a really smart decision. It saves you a ton of money and gives you great quality.
And they're fairly quiet, except for one. I have 4. Let's see, 1, 2, 3. I have 4 of them. One of them is noisy. It's got a fan, and I took it in, and they go, it's fine. I go, it's noisy. And they said it's fine. It runs at almost 100 and something degrees. It's awfully high from compared to the other ones, and they go, it's normal. It's within range. I go, so range to Apple is quite hot.
Well, just think of it this way. Chips run hot. If you were to touch a chip when it's running, you'd burn yourself.
That's true. Yep.
So your definition of heat and the chip's definition of heat are 2 totally different definitions of heat.
Yep.
So just because it's hot to you doesn't necessarily mean it's hot to the chip.
True. That's true.
All right, I need to jump in because I have a follow-up on the question from before. Okay. There was a Apple support question about problem sending Final Cut Pro 10 audio over USB, and one of the people in that stream commented, Final Cut Pro doesn't interface with any audio card that I know of. It will interface with AGA, Blackmagic Design, and Matrix devices. So the chat room question is that true? And how much will Final Cut Pro 10 audio channeled through a sound card? Will it be in sync? Will there be latency issues? So it's kind of a long.
Remember first of all that there is no concept of sound card on a Macintosh. So if someone is using the word sound card, two thoughts come to mind. The first is that they're running it on a Hackintosh, which is that they're running a Mac operating system on a PC, and they're trying to get Final Cut to run properly on a PC using a Mac operating system. If that's true, I have no concept of how that works, because I'm not a fan of that particular workaround, and I don't recommend that particular technology. So if that's what's being done, then you're on your own. I don't know how to work that. Because there is no concept of a sound card on a Mac, we just simply plug in the USB device to our Macintosh. I've been running. I'm running on the Edirol sound card now. I've never had latency. I've never had sync issues. I've never had problems. USB is rock solid. Whether I'm working in Premiere, Final Cut 7, or Final Cut 10, they all work equally well, and I've never seen issues.
Okay, this is a external sound card like M-Audio?
Okay, remember, that's not a sound card. Sound card is a card that plugs into the slot of your computer, like a PCIe card for FireWire in a PC, or a mini SAS connector, or a graphics card in a Mac Pro. There are no cards on iMacs or iBooks or MacBook Pros.
No.
So that's if what you're saying is the external sound device, the Edirol, that attaches via USB, and of all those I've ever worked with, I've never seen a problem.
But if you do have something like an M-Audio sound card, you're right, that's going to be more of a Windows machine. And they do have a lot of connectors, and they have a lot of problems on Windows, period, whether it's a Hackintosh or just a regular Windows machine. So tread carefully with that one.
Is there an external sound device called the Eclipse?
Yes. It's attached via USB.
Is that a problem?
It costs about $2,000. And Eclipse is a very high-end product. I've never seen the value of, given what I can get for $150 to $200, and most of the stuff I get is in the $125 to $140 range. The Edirol is about $140. I've never seen the value of a $2,000 Eclipse for the work that I do. So I've talked to Apple about it, but I've never seen the value of the gear.
Okay, because the person not the person in the chat room, but the original post he was citing was complaining that Final Cut and Eclipse didn't play well together, and so that was what the question was. But it sounds like that's not.
It's an interesting question, because Eclipse was one of the packages that when Soundtrack Pro was first released about 5 years ago, Eclipse was the recommended device by Apple to attach to your computer for the purposes of doing external sound monitoring. I thought it was nice of Apple to recommend a $2,000 box, and I decided not to get it. But that was where I first heard about it. So I have no more information about that, except that because Apple recommends it, Apple tends not to recommend fly-by-night companies. So Eclipse has probably been around for a while, and they would probably be able to have a solution to Final Cut 10. I would contact the vendor directly.
Awesome. Okay.
Any other questions? Because then we're going to wrap it up.
Any recommended Final Cut Pro settings for sound? That's a broad question.
Well,
very broad.
This is true. This is true of all video editors. All video editors, whether it's Final Cut or Adobe or Avid, the number one thing is you don't want your peaks to go over 0. That's really a big deal. It'll get you fired, causes distortion. It's bad. It says bad editing done here. So the first thing you want to do is actually watch the audio meters and make sure your audio doesn't exceed 0 dB. Second thing you want to do is, as you're doing your video editing, you want to build your audio tracks in layers such that the same audio is on the same track. Such that, say, on A1, all of your female talking head. On A2, all your male talking head. On Final Cut 10, because we don't have tracks, you want to assign the same track, the same type of audio to the same role. So you have a male on-camera roll, you have a female on-camera roll. So you can start to organize your audio based upon grouping the same audio in the same roll or the same track. Because when you move this over for mixing, that's the very first thing your audio engineer is going to do, is to do what's called checkerboarding your audio, grouping the audio by similar function on the same track. Because that way I can apply a single filter and make all the women sound better, a different but similar filter to make all the men sound better, a filter to all of our reverb to make whatever needs to have reverb applied to it, or a limiter filter to make or a compressor filter to make our levels come up. By having all the same audio on the same track, I only have to apply one iteration of that filter to make it sound good. So first, audio levels never exceed 0. Second, organize your audio so that the same audio or similar audio, all women, all men, is on the same track. The third thing is when I'm mixing for the web, I want to have my peaks bounce between -3 and -6. Now, if you're doing broadcast, if you're doing cable, you're doing Dolby theatrical, those numbers are different. They're measured different. They use different tools. So before the fist fight starts and the bar fight begins, I just want to specify this is a really good setting for the web and, say, for personal DVDs, is to have the peaks bounce between -3 and -6. You don't want to get it so close to 0 it's going to distort, but you want to get it above -6. So I do all of my audio mixing -3 to -6. I think those are 3 good rules. Nothing over 0. Checkerboard your audio. Keep your mix levels at -3 to -6 for the peaks. That's a good place to get started.
Yep.
Awesome.
Any more questions? One last question, or are we good?
Okay, let me put in last one. Jump in, New Scuba. Come on. You can do it. All right, hold on. Somebody's typing. So Larry, do you realize that you need to come with a quick reference guide every time we have you on? I need to go back through this and write down everything you've said as notes.
Well, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. Number one, I've written about this a lot on my website, which is larryjordan.biz. And on the left-hand side, there's a toolbar called the Editing Library. If you click on the Editing Library, it takes you to the articles that I've written. I've done almost 1,000 now, technical articles that take you through all the stuff that I've been talking about. And when you go to the Editing Library, on the left-hand side, it's grouped by software, but on the right-hand side, it's grouped by category. And if you click on the audio category, you'll see hundreds and hundreds of articles that talk about audio. If you're looking specifically for training, I've got some extended 5 hours of training on Adobe Audition that walks you through everything from the interface to editing audio to mixing audio to adding effects. And I found this is a really great place to start because it's about 70 movies, it's 5 hours of training, you watch the subject that you want to watch, and you're able to get up to speed and actually watch me do it and see why I'm doing it. Because I want to explain why you want to consider this, not only that you need to consider it. That training is available in my store if you go to larryjordan.biz/Adobe, larryjordan.biz/Adobe. It'll take you to a list of all the training products that I've got. I've got something on virtually all the media products from Adobe, but the one I'm really proud of is Audition, because it'll get you up and running in a hurry, and you're going to learn a lot.
All right, that's awesome. Thank you. Here's the question.
Okay.
In a multicam FCPX sequence, my audio gets certain pops during interviews every time I change angle views, but the audio track is the same. Once we export the audio, it's all fine. But when playing back, we notice pops.
Could be a couple of issues. Number one, all the video editors only edit on the frame boundary. They edit to a 30th of a second or a 60th of a second. If you're in the middle of a loud sound at that point, because you are switching the polarity of the sound, think of the wave going through the air. If you switch from an area of high pressure to an area of low pressure, it's going to cause a click or a pop. That can be smoothed out during the export, but that may be what you're hearing, is that you're editing where the sound is noisy and it causes a click. That's true of just editing where the sound isn't at a zero crossing line. I have not noticed this. On the other hand, I'm not doing as much multicam work on Final Cut 10 as I would like, just because there's other demands on my time. I haven't noticed the pops. If it's not exporting, then you should be okay, and it may be that what you're just hearing is an artifact of switching from one track to another. Another thing that you can do that's new with the 10.06 release is that you can actually edit multiple channels of audio from multiple cameras all at the same time. So maybe what you want to consider doing is laying down the audio track first and not editing the audio track and then just doing a switch from one camera to the next, so that you're doing a video switch with a consistent audio track, and then you go back and clean the audio up later. You can do that now with the 10.06 release, doing multi-channel audio, combining all 6 tracks. The way you do that is is to select the clip. You can reveal the tracks in the inspector by going to the audio tab, and then you can see the tracks in the timeline by going up to the clip menu and select expand audio. I think it's called expand audio components. It's the selection below expand audio. Anyway, I've got an article on my website on how that works. I've also got training on how that works, so you can take a look at my website to learn more.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, Larry, as always, it's been a pleasure having you on. There's always good information coming from you. You're like a walking Wikipedia. I've come to that conclusion.
Oh, wait a second. Larry
I
doesn't
love
get
listening
edited
to
by
you.
random strangers.
No, this is what I call mastery, and you do a very good job at it. So,
Well, thank
always
you.
a pleasure having you on. We enjoy it, and we always get really good reviews when you're on. So,
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a delight being here, and I always enjoy talking to both of you.
well, great, and also have a Merry Christmas. It's coming up pretty
Yeah.
soon.
It is very much so. I need to go get a tree. Anyway, you guys take good care of and enjoy your
You
holidays
too.
as
And
well.
for all you guys in the chat room, thanks for being there. We appreciate it. And if you're watching the recording, please subscribe. We'll be up on YouTube probably within an hour. Have a good one, everybody. Thanks. Bye, Larry. Bye, Kirsten.
Bye.
Thank you. Take care.